Before we get into today's episode, I just want to include a quick disclaimer. During the recording of this episode, we had a few technical problems with the audio, so apologies in advance for any dips in quality that you see in the audio throughout this episode.
Hi guys, and welcome to Time Travelling Team, the weekly podcast where we review every story of Doctor Who right from the very beginning. I'm Paddy.
And I'm Trisha. In this week's episode, we're looking back at the 6-episode story, The Keys of Marinus. We'll be going through some trivia, discussing the characters, and giving our thoughts on the story as a whole. Before we jump into the discussion though, Paddy, why don't you give us a rundown of today's story?
Guys go looking for some keys, stuff happens. Summary.
Okay, maybe we should go a bit more detailed than that, Paddy.
Okay. Episode 1, The Sea of Death. The TARDIS lands on an island in the middle of a lake with a giant monolith in the centre of it. They check their surroundings via the outside view screens. Ian thinks he saw something outside, but passes it off as a shadow. They exit the TARDIS to take a look outside. As they are doing this, 4 cylinders emerge from the water, and a figure in a wetsuit stalks the travellers. The island is unnervingly quiet as they look around. They notice the sand closer to the water is actually a very fine glass, and Ian stops Susan and Barbara as they are about to enter a paddling pool. They see one of Susan's shoes fall in and dissolve as if it was eaten by acid. Barbara notices that the pool is actually a tidal pool, and that must mean that the surrounding water is acid as well. The figure in the wetsuit tries to enter the TARDIS, but flees as Susan goes back to get another pair of shoes. As she leaves the TARDIS, she notices the footprints of their stalker and follows after them. Another wetsuited figure emerges from hiding and follows after her. While they are waiting for her to return, the others come across the cylinders, and the doctors think that they must be designed to travel through the acid. They see that one of the cylinders has a crack in it, and come across an empty wetsuit. Barbara notices a small tear, and that the occupant was most likely dissolved by the acid. They notice the monolith and decide to collect Susan and go and investigate. When they arrive back at the TARDIS, they discover Susan missing, and assume that she has gone to the monolith. Once they reach the monolith, they decide to split up to find her, with Ian and Barbara going in one direction, and the doctor the other, so they can complete a full circuit of the monolith. As Susan is exploring the structure, one of the stalkers lies in wait for her with a knife. Suddenly, a trapdoor opens in the wall, and the figure falls through it. The same fate befalls Susan, and she screams as she falls through the trapdoor. Ian and Barbara hear her and rush after her. Meanwhile, the doctor also falls through one. Ian and Barbara reach the area where they thought they heard Susan scream, but there is no sign of her, nor of the doctor. Inside the monolith, Susan is exploring when a roped figure emerges from the hallway behind her, but retreats back the way it came. As she backs away from it, the stalker grabs Susan, but she manages to fend him off. The stalker falls to the ground with a knife in its back, and the rope figure once again emerges from the hallway. Ian and Barbara are trying to figure out what happened to the others, but both of them fall through separate trapdoors. Ian comes across the body of the stalker and continues on down the hallway. The doctor, Barbara and Susan are in a holding cell and discussing what has happened to them. The doctor deduces that the people in the wetsuits are intruders and the robed ones are the inhabitants of the monolith. The doctor says that Ian is their best chance of rescue, but Barbara informs him that he went missing just before she did. In the hallway, Ian comes across one of the men in the robes struggling with one of the wetsuited intruders, and goes to his aid. Together they manage to force him through a trapdoor that leads into the acid sea. He thanks Ian and introduces himself as Arbitan. He informs him that he is the sole occupant of the monolith, and that the invaders are from a race called the Voords. He takes Ian to the others, but neither of them notice the last remaining Voord following after them. Arbitan tells them that they are on the planet Marinus, and that he is the keeper of a machine called the Conscience of Marinus. The Conscience was designed to be an impartial and infallible judgment machine that kept law and order on the planet. The machine reached its peak when it was able to control and eradicate evil thoughts to create a utopian society. For centuries, Marinus lived in peace until the Voords, led by Yartek, assaulted the planet. The inhabitants were not able to defend themselves, so they scattered the control keys for the Conscience all over the planet so the Voords could not get control of it. In the meantime, the Conscience was upgraded to exude its influence over the Voords. Arbitan says that he has lost all hope of recovering the keys, as all his friends and family perished in their attempts to retrieve them, and he says that the travellers must retrieve them now. The doctor refuses and they depart back to the TARDIS. However, Arbitan has raised a force field around it, saying he will let them back into it once they have recovered the keys. With no choice, the travellers agree to help Arbitan, and he says that he knows the rough area of each of the keys, and gives them a pre-programmed travel dial that will bring them to each destination one after the other. Barbara activates hers and disappears. The others follow after her, after Arbitan urges them to ensure the Voords do not get control of the machine. After they leave, the last Voord enters and kills Arbitan. The doctor, Ian and Susan arrive at their destination and see Barbara's dial on the floor, speckled with blood. Episode 2, The Velvet Web. They see a doorway behind them, and the doctor deduces that whoever took Barbara must be behind it. Ian rushes through it, but the doctor advises caution, but it's too late as once he opens the door an alarm goes off. The alarm seems to be pain-inducing, but it is suddenly turned off. Inside, they see Barbara reclining on a sofa, wearing Grecian-style clothing and being attended to by 2 handmaidens. She says that she panicked after using the travel dial and she scratched herself as she tore it off her arm. She summons more food for her friends as they look around at their new surroundings. Ian is hesitant to partake of any of the food until he knows who their host is. A male attendant arrives and says they are in the city of Morpheton, where the inhabitants live in bliss as their every desire is catered for. He says he will give the travellers whatever they like and it will be ready for them in the morning. The travellers retire for the evening, but Ian is still very sceptical, being unnerved by the fact that the attendant never once blinked. Barbara says he's being overcautious and not to worry and that they should all go to sleep, to which he agrees. As they sleep, a female attendant enters the room and places a small disc on each of their heads, but the one on Barbara's head falls off. She wakes up and the alarm goes off, rendering her unconscious. In the morning, the Doctor, Ian and Susan are enjoying their breakfast as Barbara is still asleep. Ian and Doctor comment on a mark on each of their foreheads, while Susan goes to wake up Barbara to show her a dress that was made for her. Barbara wakes up and is horrified to find her surroundings have changed to a squalid room filled with dirty cups, plates and broken furniture, but to the others the room looks the same. The male attendant, who's named as Altos, enters and realizes that the illusion is no longer working on Barbara, who flees from his attempts to take her to a physician. Altos enters a room that is occupied by a group of brains with eye stalks living in jars. He says that Barbara is no longer under the control of the Mesmeron. The brains instruct him to find her and kill her and prepare the others for full enslavement. They also instruct him to punish the female attendant, Sabetha, for her failure. Altos brings the Doctor and Ian to what they believe to be a highly advanced laboratory, but is actually a room full of more dirty old cups and plates. He returns to the brain room and they instruct him to assign the Doctor, Ian and Susan various servant roles and to find Barbara, or else they will kill him for his failure. Barbara is hiding in the dungeons and she encounters Sabetha, who is imprisoned for her failures. Barbara tries to wake her from the illusion, but it is no use. Barbara notices that she is wearing one of the keys of the machine and deduces that she must be Arbitan's missing daughter. Altos enters and struggles with Barbara, but is knocked out when Sabetha breaks a chair over his head. Barbara says that she must rescue the others, but promises to come back. She encounters Ian in the hallway, but he is fully under the control of the brains and brings her to them. They explain that they evolved beyond their bodies, but need others to perform their physical tasks for them, and so they enslave the rest of the populace of the city. They instruct Ian to kill Barbara as they will not be able to hypnotize her as she has seen the reality of the city. She fends him off and destroys the brain's life support systems, thus freeing the city and all of its inhabitants from their control. As the city is engulfed in a riot, the travellers regroup, with Susan bringing Sabetha and Altos, who is also one of Arbitan's missing helpers. He says that he came with another named Ypres, who went on ahead to find the 4th key site, but he has not heard from him. The Doctor says that he alone will search for Ypres, while the others go on to the next key location. Susan wants to go with him, but he says that she will be safer with the main group, and that she shouldn't be worried about him. He gives Altos and Sabetha their old travel dials which he was able to find, and they agree to meet in 1 week's time at the 3rd key site. Susan activates her dial before the others and lands in a jungle filled with a terrible screaming. Episode 3. The Screaming Jungle. The screaming suddenly stops and the others arrive to find a distraught Susan. Barbara comforts her as Ian and the others investigate their surroundings. They think the next key is in a temple overgrown with dense vines and creepers. Ian suggests that they look around to find another way in. Barbara says that she and Susan will stay behind to see if they can find something to cut through the nearby doorway. Barbara asks Susan about the sound that she heard, and Susan says that whatever it was evil. As Barbara is looking at the doorway, one of the creepers begins to move up and tries to wrap itself around Susan's legs. Barbara helps her and crushes the creeper with a rock, but tells Susan that it must have fallen on her. As they take a look at the doorway, Barbara finds that she is able to make her way through quite easily and walks down a hallway to a large statue. Ian and the others return, and Barbara calls out that she has found the key. As she takes it from the top of the statue, the arms close around her, and then it rotates into a hidden compartment in the wall. Ian and Altos are too late to try and save her, but find the key that she dropped. Sabetha points out that maybe Barbara used her travel dial to escape, and as they are discussing this possibility, they hear the statue return to its original position with no sign of Barbara. Altos says that either she managed to escape, or she will be on the other side of the wall. Ian tells the others to go on to the next key site while he remains to look for Barbara. Altos and Susan go on ahead, but Sabetha drops the key. As she picks it up, she notices that it is a fake. Ian tells her to stick to the plan and go after the others to tell them what has happened. He goes to the statue and allows himself to be taken into the secret chamber. Inside, he comes across a statue of a knight wielding an axe, and more overgrown foliage, but no sign of Barbara. He accidentally steps on a booby trap that activates the knight, and Barbara calls out a warning to him just in time. Ian tells her that the key was a fake and that they still need to find it. Barbara warns him though that the temple is rigged with more traps and they need to be careful. They try to force their way through a door, but it is no good. Ian goes to find something to pry the door open, and Barbara waits as more vines start to make their way down towards her. Suddenly the door opens and she calls out to Ian, who says he will come once he has managed to untangle a pickaxe that he found. Barbara enters the doorway, which triggers another trap. A weighted net falls on top of her, pinning her to the floor, as blades stuck in the roof slowly start to lower down towards her. Ian tries to take the pickaxe with him to rescue her, but it too is a trap, and bars lock him into the alcove. Just as the blades are about to hit Barbara, they retreat, and a disheveled-looking man comes out from another doorway and asks who they are and why they seek the key. She says that Arbitan sent them and shows him the travel dial to prove it. He takes it from her to verify her claims. However, as he leaves, the vines attack him and begin to strangle him. Ian manages to break free from his confinement and rescues Barbara. Together they rescue the old man, who tells them that they will need to leave as the jungle is attacking again. They urge him to tell the location of the key, and he gives them a strange code before he dies and before they can make sense of it. They go into a room that he was pointing at as he died, and inside they see a safe. They try the code to see if it is a combination, but it doesn't work, and so they set about searching the room inch by inch. Ian finds a journal the old man kept to log his experiments, which talks about accelerating the destructive power of natural erosion. Suddenly, the screaming Susan heard earlier starts again, and the jungle starts to break into the room. They notice a label on a broken jar and realise that the code that the old man gave was actually a chemical formula, and they search for the correct jar. They locate the key and hurriedly jump to the next key site, which is in the middle of a snowstorm. Episode 4. The Snows of Terror. Ian and Barbara pass out due to the extreme cold, but they are found by a man who brings them back to his cabin. He introduces himself as Vassor, a trapper that lives on the mountain, and he tells them that he brought them back to his cabin with the aid of a stranger, who is desperately searching for a pair of girls. They realise that this must be Altos, and Vassar informs them that he is most likely in the nearby village, which is 3 miles away. Ian asks Vassar to lend him some furs so that he can go to the village, but Vassar says that he requires payment, as he can't trust that Ian will return. He asks for Ian's travel dial, and Ian reluctantly agrees. Vassar gives him furs, a lantern, and a travel pack. He promises to come back with the others, or hopefully some news. In the cabin, Vassar and Barbara are finishing eating, and they begin to clean up. Barbara opens one of the drawers and sees 4 travel dials and Sabate's necklace with the keys on it. Vassar says that he took the item as payment for his assistance. Barbara says that he is lying and that when Ian comes back, he will have to answer for his actions. Vassar laughs and says that's if Ian comes back. Ian makes his way through the blizzard and he comes across Altos lying in the snow, with his hands tied up. He frees him and discovers that the travel pack that Vassar gave him is actually full of meat, meant to attract the wolves that inhabit the mountain. Altos tells Ian that he got separated from the girls when they arrived, and he encountered Vassar, who he forced to help him in his search for them. They hear the howls of approaching wolves and leave the meat for them as they race back to Vassar's hut to rescue Barbara. They arrive just in time as she fights him to let them in. They force him to lead them to the cave that he left the girls in. They arrive at the cave and see signs that the girls were there recently, who they deduce must have gone deeper into the cave system. Vassar is reluctant to go further as he says that there are demons in the cave, but Ian forces him on. Susan and Sabata are exploring deeper into the cave and encounter a giant chasm with a rope bridge running across it. On the other side is a chamber containing statues of knights, similar to the previous location. They flee the chamber and encounter the others, who have all crossed the bridge except for Vassar. As they are rejoicing their reunion, Vassar unties the bridge, trapping them on the other side. They decide to press on to find the key and hopefully find a way out of the cave. They re-enter the chamber and see the key is lodged in a block of ice in the centre of the group of statues. They find a pipe running into the block with a valve on it. Barbara turns it and they discover it is a steam valve that begins to melt the ice. While they are waiting, Ian and Altos bring some petrified tree trunks that they tie together to form a rudimentary bridge. Sabata recovers the key, but the knights, who are actually frozen guardians and not statues, come to life and attack the group. Ian ushers everyone out of the chamber and stays behind to fight off the knights. Susan makes her way across the branch bridge to the other side and reconnects the rope bridge, allowing the others to escape. Ian disconnects the bridge after he crosses it, causing one of the knights to fall to his doom. They arrive back at Vassar's cabin and retrieve their travel dials and the other keys. The remaining knights have somehow managed to follow after them, and Vassar takes Susan hostage in an attempt to escape, but he is killed when a sword bursts through the door and into his back. The travellers jump to the next location as the knights crash into the cabin. At the next key site, Ian comes across the unconscious form of a man in a guard's uniform. He sees the key in a glass cabinet and attempts to open it, but is struck from behind by an unseen figure. The figure stages the scene so it looks like Ian attacked the guard, and then the figure steals the key. Episode 5. The Sentence of Death. Ian comes to and is immediately addressed by a seated figure behind him. He introduces himself as Taran, an interrogator for the city of Millennius, and asks Ian to tell him what happened. He tells Taran what he remembers before he was knocked unconscious, but Taryn does not believe him and demands to know where he has hidden the key. Ian insists that he doesn't have it, so Taryn informs him that he will be brought to the Guardian building to face formal murder charges. Taryn informs him that the rules of their society dictate that it is guilty until proven innocent. He tells Ian that he can have someone act as his counsel, and Ian says that he must locate the doctor to represent him. Barbara is told that she and the others have been given permission to see Ian before the trial, and he is brought to see them. The doctor arrives much to everyone's joy, and he takes Ian aside to discuss what has happened before the trial. They are summoned to the tribunal, where Ian is sentenced to death in 3 days unless it can be proven that he is innocent. The doctor is given the floor to make his defence, but he says he cannot make an adequate defence without time to review all the facts. The tribunal agrees, and they postpone the hearing by 2 days. The doctor informs the group that the murdered man was Ypres, Altos' friend who went on ahead in the search for the keys. He tells them that he met Ypres and together they plan to get the key, but Ypres must have let slip his plans to someone who killed him for the key. The doctor delegates tasks to everyone, asking Altos and Sabetha to research murder cases in Millennius, while Susan and Barbara will serve as his detectives. They first interview Taryn, who tells them that the scanners monitoring the room indicate that the missing key is not recorded as leaving the room. The only other people to come into the room were the relief guard, the building controller, and the perimeter guard, and that Ian must be the killer and thief. The doctor excuses him, and he decides to test the theory by recreating the crime. He hypothesizes that there was a third person in the room who killed Ypres and then hid when Ian came in, and that he avoided detection because he was above suspicion because he was in fact the relief guard named Aidan. Susan says that he should tell Taryn, but the doctor says that he will need to prove the theory first and assigns them the task of going to the relief guard's home. They go to Aidan's house, but only to find his wife there at the moment. Through their questioning of her, they discovered that there would be a high reward for the person who found the key. Aidan returns and acts nervously around him. He nearly outs himself when Susan says that they know where the key is, but he manages to stop himself in time before he says that they couldn't possibly know. He orders them out of the house, and after they leave, they hear Aidan berate and beat his wife. Back in the tribunal building, the chief prosecutor receives a call that he takes in private. It seems that he is also involved in the conspiracy, as he instructs the person on the other end of the line to carry out a secret task. The trial recommences, and the chief prosecutor, Ison, continues to use the circumstantial evidence against Ian. The doctor takes the floor and says that the murderer is in the room and he will prove it. He calls Sabetha to the stand, and she says that she is in possession of the key, as it was given to her by the man who killed Ypres. She says it was Aidan, who says that it's impossible as she could not have found its location. He realises that he has outed himself and attempts to flee, but is stopped by Barbara and Susan. He agrees to confess and reveal his co-conspirators, but he is shot and killed by an unseen weapon. The doctor reveals the quest he and the others are on to the tribunal, and that it is one of the other keys Sabetha showed the court. However, it is still not enough to convince them of Ian's innocence. Ison uses his closing statement to state that it is Ian who is the co-conspirator that Aidan was going to reveal, and the judges request the doctor give his closing arguments. Barbara is called away and given a note saying that there will be another death if they reveal the key's location. She, Altos and Sabetha discuss what this could mean for the case when a call comes in for Barbara. It's from Susan, who says that she has been kidnapped. Episode 6, The Keys of Marinus. Susan informs Barbara that her captors intend to kill her, and the call is disconnected. Barbara tells the others that they cannot tell the doctor or Ian, as they need to focus on the trial. She says that they will have to figure out how to rescue Susan and uncover the plot. They decide to go question Aidan's wife, Carla, to see if she can give them any information about the people Aidan may have been in contact with over the last few days. Once they arrive there, Carla breaks down in tears and says that she can't assist them, so they leave. Once they are gone, Carla starts to laugh and opens a room that Susan is held captive in. She taunts Susan and then gets a call from Ison, who tells her Ian is to be executed soon, as there is still no sign of the key. He also tells her to kill Susan. As they are returning to inform the doctor, Barbara realises that Carla must be involved, as she had made reference to the others speaking to Susan, but they had never actually mentioned having spoken to her on the phone. They return to the house just in time to stop Carla from killing Susan. Back in the courtroom, the doctor is contemplating Ian's fate when Ison comes over to give his condolences. Taryn comes out and locks away the exhibits in the evidence cupboard, and then he goes to talk to the doctor. Barbara calls the courthouse and informs Taryn and the doctor of Carla's part in the conspiracy, and that she was the one who killed Aidan using a hidden gun. Taryn emerges from questioning her and informs the group that Carla has named Ian as his accomplice. Taryn says that he doesn't fully believe her, but he needs the proof that she is lying. Susan mentions that she heard Carla on the phone with someone who said that he was going to collect the key from its hiding place that evening. The doctor rejoices, as this is their opportunity to prove Ian's innocence. That night, a hooded figure enters the evidence room and goes to take the weapon that killed Ypres, as it was going to be tested to see who had previously wielded it. Suddenly, the figure is apprehended, and the Doctor turns on the lights to reveal to everyone that it is actually Ison. He also reveals that the key was hidden in the head of the weapon. Altos and Sabeta have gone on ahead to meet Arbitan, and the Doctor and the others bid farewell to Taran. Back at the monolith, Altos has been captured by Yartek and the Voords, and demands to know where the final key is. Sabeta is brought into the room, and Artek threatens to kill Altos unless she tells him where the final key is. Yartek uses their love for each other against him by threatening each of them that he will kill the other unless they reveal the key's location. Altos gives in and says that the Doctor has it. The others arrive back, and the Doctor confirms that the force field around the TARDIS has been lifted and that they should deliver the last key to Arbitan. Ian and Barbara note that it's curious that neither Altos or Sabeta have come to meet them. As they are going down a corridor, the Doctor and Ian ambush a Voord and knock him unconscious. They agree to split up, with the Doctor and Barbara going to find Altos and Sabeta, while Ian and Susan go to find Arbitan. Ian and Susan enter the room with the Conscience and see Yartek disguised as Arbitan, saying that they should not look at him because the radiation from the machine has disfigured him. He asks them to leave the key and that they should bring the Doctor and Barbara to him. While they are making their way down the corridor, Ian and Susan voice their suspicions about Arbitan's strange behaviour. Barbara meets them and brings them to the cell where she and the Doctor located Altos and Sabeta. Ian reveals that he gave Yartek the fake key from their earlier travels, but Altos warns him that if it is entered into the machine, it will still activate it, but will not be able to control its power, and the resulting overload will destroy the monolith completely. They manage to escape as Yartek enters the fake key, causing the machine to explode. Before they leave, the Doctor has a quick word with Sabeta and cautions her about entrusting the laws and justice of a planet to machines, and tells her to carry out her father's work to try and maintain the peace on the planet. They bid farewell to their new friends, and the TARDIS takes off. End of episode 6 and end of the story.
Great recap as always, Paddy.
Now that's the story recapped. How about we go over to Trish to go over some trivia notes? Trish?
Thanks, Paddy. So, for this week's story, we have a returning writer, Mr. Terry Nation. We discussed Terry before, as he is the one who created one of, if not the most iconic Doctor Who monster, the Dalek. This is the first of only 2 stories Terry wrote for Doctor Who that are not about the Daleks. Terry loved the puzzle aspect of the story, so he and script editor David Whittaker decided on a series of mini-ventures that would take the crew to different destinations, so they could have different types of sets, and they were very, very keen on it being this series of mini-adventures. The director for this story was John Gorey, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is his only Doctor Who directorial credit. Reportedly, he wasn't a big fan of the script, but he agreed to direct in order to advance his career. Good enough reason as any, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so.
The air date for this story was the 11th of April to the 16th of May 1964. The Keys of Marinus was written to replace a different script, Doctor Who and the Hidden Planet, which was deemed problematic and required extensive rewrites. The tank top sweater vest thingy that Susan is wearing was actually knitted by Caroline Ford's mother. It's a nice contribution to the wardrobe. We mentioned last week that people thought William Hartnell was on holiday during one of the episodes of Marco Polo, since he only had one line in that episode. While that wasn't true last week, it is true in this story that during the filming of episodes 3 and 4, William Hartnell did take a holiday, which is why the Doctor is not in those episodes. He'd been working non-stop from October to April, and he just needed a break, which I think is well deserved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree.
What's interesting though, and this probably wouldn't happen in a lot of shows nowadays, is that even though he wasn't in the episodes, he did still receive on-screen credit for them. The remaining cast would take holidays throughout upcoming stories as well, so it wasn't just William getting special treatment. Some word origins for you. So, Marinus originated from the Latin term Marinus, meaning of the sea. Morphoton is based on Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams, not the Matrix character. He's a different person. Millennius obviously comes from the term millennium, and Arbitan is based on the Latin word arbiter, meaning judge. Caroline Ford reportedly did not like how Susan was portrayed in this story. She felt she was written like a child and even described her character as being pathetic. A bit much, but okay. The Screaming Jungle was the subject of Doctor Who's first serious plagiarism charge. Robert Gould, who was another writer, complained to Donald Wilson, the head of serials at the BBC, that a story about plant life being the dominant evolutionary species on a planet had been something that he'd outlined to David Whittaker, and that he felt had been plagiarized into The Screaming Jungle. Whittaker had to send a memo back to Wilson offering a defense against the charge, and he was successful because his defense was based on the statement that Terry Nation had independently arrived at the use of vegetation as being hostile in the jungle, while, and this is a bit mean to include, but Gould's idea was derivative of the Day of the Triffids anyway. So kind of hinting at Gould, don't accuse other people of plagiarism when you yourself are plagiarizing.
Yeah, don't copy my copy.
Surprisingly, even though the story contains an attempted rape on Barbara by Vassar, BBC Video released the story in 1999 with a U certificate. So for those who are not familiar with the British and Irish rating system, U means it's universal, so it can be watched by any age group, which some people think was maybe not quite appropriate for this story.
Yeah, PG would have probably been a better rating.
Yeah, I think we'll get to that particular issue more when we get to the overall discussion. Let's talk about William Hartnell line flubs. So William Hartnell, as we've discussed, is quite famous for his line flubs. However, there is one in this story that was not a line flub.
Huh.
In the part where the Doctor says, "I can't prove at this very moment," and then he stumbles and says, "I can't improve at this very moment," that was actually written into the script by Terry Nation. No one knows why. It was a deliberate stumble of, "I can't improve at this very moment." I can't prove at this very moment. That was deliberately written into the script. So for anyone who was chalking one up on the William Hartnell flubs tally board, take that tally off. That wasn't a flub. That was in the script. In the original script, we do get an explanation for why the Doctor and Susan had been on Earth in 1963 at the start of An Unearthly Child. If you recall, there's a bit where Barbara asks the Doctor around having a screen that portrays in colour, and the Doctor says he has one, but it's not really working. Apparently, he had gone to the BBC to get help repairing the scanner, and the BBC were not very helpful. And apparently that's where they were on Earth in 1963, was they wanted the BBC to help them fix their scanner, and the BBC said no.
How very meta.
Yeah. I can only wonder why I didn't make it in. So, some guest actors. Arbitan is played by, I'm going to ruin his name. I always do this. Arbitan is played by George Coulouris. Coulouris. Coulouris.
I think Coulouris is probably close enough to it.
This is his only Doctor Who acting credit. However, he did do a lot of work on stage and screen in the 30s and 40s, and was in several productions on Broadway, including his own production of Richard III. He was also a member of the Mercury Theatre, which people who are fans of theatre may know is the independent rep theatre company founded in New York by Orson Welles and producer John Houseman.
Also, he may have been part of the War of the Worlds scare back in the 30s.
Possibly could have been.
You devious bastard.
Next, we have Robin Phillips as Altos. He was actually trained at the Bristol Old Vic, which is the same place where Sir Patrick Stewart was trained, and they were contemporaries. He was a very talented stage actor and also a very talented director, and he even directed a musical version of Jekyll and Hyde in 1997 on Broadway, which is great. He was appointed an Officer of the Order of Canada in 2005, which is a Canadian national order and the second highest honour for merit in the system of orders, decorations and medals of Canada, and comes after the Order of Merit. Again, this is his only Doctor Who acting credit. Lastly, as Sabitha, we have Catherine Schofield. As far as I can see, no relation to Philip Schofield. She was a prolific TV actress who got her start in 1963, so not too long before appearing on Doctor Who. But again, this is her only Doctor Who acting credit.
And just one little acting credit from myself is that if anyone ever thinks to look for anything that Francis de Wolf, the guy who plays Vassar, is a good guy in, it's impossible. He's always been a scumbag. Well, from my viewing of stuff anyway.
Very good.
Thank you once again, Trish, for the trivia notes. They're always interesting.
No problem at all.
So speaking of characters and or actors and people they played, how about we move on to the character discussion now?
Very good. So each week, Paddy and I discuss the characters that appear in our story. Generally speaking, we discuss the Doctor, the companions, and the villains. So Paddy, why don't you get us started with your thoughts on the Doctor in the Keys of Marinus?
I have labelled this story Law and Order Doctor Who. Because, as you pointed out earlier on, he was absent for 2 episodes, but then the 2 episodes that he returns in, he makes a huge impact in, I think. It's great seeing William Hartnell at like the serious side of the Doctor, because as much as I love the gleeful side of things, which he does have at certain points in the story, it's really good seeing him play the character not angrily, but seriously, like looking to defend people, looking to defend his friends. And I think those are some of like his finest acting moments as well. I also really enjoyed his little temper tantrum at the start with Arbiter, which essentially came down to a small child saying, "Give me back my toy."
What I loved about that though is it's totally him having the same trick played on him that he played on the others at the beginning of the Daleks.
Yeah.
Like, now you know what it feels like.
Yeah. Like, just like when he gets into that whole it kind of reminds me of Jim Carrey, like, in Batman Forever, going, Batman, you say. But
that audio is going to translate really well into the podcast, by the way.
Absolutely. Is there a dog attacking him? Who knows what's going on in the background? No, but I think especially since Edge of Destruction, and now moving into Marco, and now definitely here, William Hartnell, to me, like, he comes across as definitely hitting his stride and becoming more comfortable in the role, at least on screen anyway. Whatever about the issues he had in the background with too many lines or anything like that, he's really giving a really good powerhouse performance in this story, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think in this story, and we kind of got it in Marco as well, though you can't, sadly, because of the way Marco now survives, you can't really enjoy it to quite the same extent. But I think in this story, we really get who William Hartnell's Doctor is. He's very intelligent, very keen observationist, but he also has this impishness and this teasing nature. Like, you see it with Ian at the beginning, where he's like, "Why aren't you wearing any shoes? Why are you wandering with no shoes on?" He knows that Ian gave Susan his shoes, but he says it just to be funny and just to tease them, which is great. But we do also get, like you said, that serious nature, and particularly like when he sat outside the courthouse, or the courtroom rather, waiting on news of Ian, and all he can do is just sit there, head down, and you really see how much he cares.
Yeah.
Which is great. People sometimes, and we don't want to jump the timeline too much, I'm sure we'll discuss this at a later stage, but people sometimes give Hartnell's Doctor a lot of grief. And I don't know if it's that they haven't watched the episodes, or maybe they only watch certain ones, but they make assumptions about his character. And that's not who he was. He's not a sexist prick.
Yeah.
He's a genuinely lovely granddad. That's who he is. He's a granddad by nature, and he, like I said, he's a bit impish. He's got a teasing quality. He can throw his toys out of the pram when he doesn't get what he wants.
Yeah.
But he's also very intelligent and very caring. And the one bit I really liked, and you probably picked up on this as well, is we see in this story his unwavering faith in Ian.
Yeah.
The minute they get captured, he's like, "It's fine, because Ian will find us." It's what he does.
Yeah.
And the Doctor does not doubt it for 1 second. And the idea of him being guilty of murder. I love that we don't see the Doctor in particular question this even once. There is no question that Ian is innocent, which if you take, again, we're looking at a post Edge of Destruction show here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at pre Edge of Destruction, we may have seen some questions about maybe Ian did do it.
Yeah.
And I love that it's not even questioned once.
Because I think in this regards, you have up until, like as you said, like pre-Edge of Destruction, the whole thing was that the Doctor couldn't trust Ian and Barbara fully because there was always that overarching thing of they want to go home, so they may do anything in order to go home. Whereas after the adventure with Marco and going into this one, as you said, it's a case of just complete faith that Ian wouldn't kill anyone, because even if he wanted to get home as desperately as he does, Ian wouldn't stoop to killing someone to do it.
Yeah. Which I love. And like I said, it's very quintessential Hartnell Doctor in this story, which I absolutely love. I also love that obviously it was written as a way to give William Hartnell 2 weeks off. But I love the idea that the Doctor's like, there's a civilized society on this planet. Okay, you guys go do all the pick-uppy stuff. I'm going to be off with the civilized society. And like his excuse for Susan not going with him, I sort of got the sense that Granddad wants a holiday.
Yeah.
Away from you.
Yeah.
For a couple of days.
I want people on my intellectual level. Sorry, goodbye.
Yeah, but no, that was great though.
Absolutely, it was. And I suppose we've talked about Ian a fair bit in our kind of talk about the Doctor there, so how about we move on to Ian as the first companion?
Yeah, sure. I think, again, for Ian, this is going to be something that we're going to say over and over again, and it can probably be made into a drinking game at some point. Ian really does take charge in this story. So for episodes 3 and 4, it's really Ian taking charge. What I like in this story, though, is that his protective nature and his being in charge, it gets talked about. Barbara and Susan do discuss it. And I get that they said that, sometimes he's very protective and Susan sort of quirks at Barbara, so sometimes you like to rebel against his protective nature.
Yeah.
But they do confirm that they do appreciate it. It's not seen as, oh my god, he's so overbearing and boorish. It's, he's so protective.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, you just have to do what you've got to do.
And it's interesting as well to see that on the second half of the story that the roles are sort of reversed, because Ian's the one that's put into the situation of helplessness.
Yeah, that's a really good call. And it's actually the one thing from Ian's character in this story that I didn't like was in the back part of the story, Ian says very little while he's standing trial. But I would have liked to have seen more from him about Ian's mental state. Like, he's being accused of murder and he's knowing he's about to be killed, and all we really get are a couple of worried looks at a clock.
Mm-hmm. And
I just would have liked to have seen more. Now, maybe that's how Ian would react in that situation. I don't know, though.
Well, I suppose it's a case of you've been told that you're in a society that it's guilty until proven innocent, and you only have one person that can speak to you for your case. Maybe he's just kind of expending all his energies on just remaining calm as opposed to trying to make, because maybe he feels that if he was to say something or get like narky while he's in holding, it might reflect badly against his case and inhibit the Doctor from being able to help him.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe what I was looking for was like a scene just between the Doctor and Ian, where they're talking it out.
Yeah.
Do you know? Because he just seems a little bit placid during the whole thing. Just in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, like I suppose like he can come across as placid, all right, and it would have been maybe one of those like a prisoner visitation scenes might have been a bit expansive for him. But I suppose maybe this is another way to take a look at Ian, in the sense of there are times like where he can be just human and not the action man, and it's like, I'm sort of screwed here.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. Because like everyone has their moments of defeat, I suppose, and like up until now, Ian has been the man of, as you said, man of action, take charge. We can do this sort of thing. And when you're trying to hold that together for everyone, when everyone's not around, you can, I suppose, maybe feel a bit sorry for yourself.
Yeah, the other scene that I actually forgot was in this story. So I'm going to give a little bit of insight here and jump the timeline for a second. So you know that one of my favorite scenes in all of Doctor Who, and one of the most chilling for me, comes in Tom Baker's era.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in Terror of the Zygons, when Harry, quotation marks, goes after Sarah with a pitchfork. And I love that scene, and you and I have discussed it ad nauseum in the past. We get a similar feel in the second episode when Ian goes to strangle Barbara.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same with Ian and the Doctor. How I would have liked to have a scene of the two of them talking it out. And maybe even the Doctor being like, of course you're innocent, I would never think that you were anything else. I kind of would have liked to have seen Ian deal with the fact that he nearly strangled his best friend.
Yeah, especially such a short space of time as well.
It was a powerful moment, and I would have loved to have seen him deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess that some of those, like, nice little kind of introspective moments about what they had done while under the influence would have been nice to see. But I think that this was such a breakneck pace, story, that I think it might have slowed it down a small bit if they did that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it's one of those things that I wonder, in the future, will they ever come back to it? Or will we ever see instances like this again where we might get a slightly more character-driven response?
Who knows? It's not like we've got 50 odd years of stuff to get. Well, I suppose with these guys 2 odd years, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. Yeah, I think maybe you're right. Maybe it would have slowed the episodes down too much.
So how about we move along to Barbara now?
Of course. Do you want to go first with Barbara, or do you want me to go first?
You go first, and then I'll follow on.
Okay. I am loving Barbara more and more with each episode that I watch. Bear in mind, I loved her before, but now sort of seeing, because I watched the stories out of order before, so now watching them in order, I'm just coming to appreciate her a lot more. I know the only reason why the Son discs, or whatever they called them, in episode 2, I know the only reason that it didn't work on her was because she moved in her sleep. But I love her in that second episode. I love the acting. I love the strength she had. Her having to fight Ian off, like we said, when Ian tried to strangle her.
Yeah.
It's so hard to watch, but in a good character story driven way, because up until this point, Ian has been her protector. Ian has always been there to make sure that she's safe and she's okay, and to have that pulled away from her, but for her to step up, she didn't wallow in it. She was scared, but she fought back and protected herself from the one person that was meant to protect her, and I thought that was really, really well done. And I love that she so easily was able to brush him off. It's she is stronger than you think.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you might kind of chalk it up to the strength of desperation, or the adrenaline burst, but overall Barbara is a very hands-on companion. We saw that back in the Daleks when she actually helped some of the Thals attack an actual Dalek, and pushed them around and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and in the episode that follows that, so the Screaming Forest, or whatever it's called, I've forgotten it now, you said it a while ago, but in that following episode we do see a bit more of quote unquote screaming Barbara, but it's counterbalanced with the fact that she is headstrong and she will rebel, as Susan said, against Ian and just go off and do her own thing. That's not to say though that when she's in trouble she doesn't admit that she's in trouble and won't call for him to come help her. She's not stupid, like.
No, it's like it's there's things that Barbara can handle by herself, and then there's time to bring in, I won't say the big guns, but we'll just say bring in the guns.
Yeah, I think overall over this 6-episode story, we get to see a lot of her. She has some really strong moments. So episode 2 was this really strong moment. She had strong moments in episode 3. Episode 4 with the Vassar, and we'll get into more detail with him later. But she did hold her own in a really big way. And then in 5 and 6, we got to see her being a detective and sleuthing and figuring things out.
It kind of reminds me of small, but like, you know, just really weirdly, a Quantum Leap. Like each episode, she seems to have a different skill set.
Yeah, but they all feed nicely off each other because it's all about her observation skills and her ability to think her way out of a situation, which I like.
Yeah. Like there's 2 really good moments of Barbara that kind of really strike out to me in this, or like stand out to me in this. And there's one is, as we said, the Vassar thing, where like, if anyone goes back and watches this episode, you know, you'll see it for yourselves, but for a descriptor of Vassar, he's like a big mountain man. He's a really intimidating presence. And she does stand up to him. And like that's a really, really cool thing to see. The other thing is when she destroys the life support systems for the brains and the jars, she just picks up a piece of wood and just starts swinging, and she actually shatters like some of their glass cabinets as well. And it's that she's afraid, but she's determined as well, and it's just like those wild swings. You might think that like, all right, it's just this is what the script says, but it's actually a really good acting moment from Jacqueline Hill as well.
Yeah, I think this is probably, I mean, Edge of Destruction was good for Jacqueline Hill. She had a lot to work with, but that was a shorter story. Marco Polo sounded good, but unfortunately we don't get to enjoy the visual at the moment. So I think in terms of the 5 stories we've had a chance to look at, this is by far Barbara's strongest, in my opinion.
And as you said, that's just the ones we've got to look at, because I don't want to jump the line of time too much, but next week we've got a great Barbara showcase coming up, but we'll discuss that next week.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for that one.
Cool. So on to Susan.
Yeah, and I hate to admit it, but I agree with Caroline Ford on this one. Susan was so badly done in this story. At some points, she's almost a waste of space. It's like, why is she even there? She doesn't add any value.
She has one moment in the entirety of the story, and that's when she's the one that crosses like the ad hoc bridge that Ian and Altos created to get to the other side to bring up the rope bridge again. But other than that, she's kind of a non-entity, and that's a shame, because she goes from being a non-entity to the typical view of like, you know, the screaming companion, in the sense of she can't really seem to fend for herself when the other guys aren't there, and then it goes to being like the kidnap victim. And it just seems that we're like, with the Doctor and with Barbara and Ian, they're all capable of holding their own, and they're all capable of holding a scene or scenes by themselves. But when it comes to Susan, unfortunately that's not the case, so as far as we've seen, and I feel a bit bad for her in that regards.
Yeah, and like, even that scene where she crosses the ice bridge, that could have been given to anybody.
Yeah.
It wasn't specifically Susan, and it's unfortunate because there's so much good in her character that to see it sort of sidelined. And, you know, she's so clingy, first to the Doctor, and then with Barbara sort of taking on like a mothering role for her. And there's one line, and I nearly put my hand through the screen. Well, nearly got off the couch, walked to the TV and put my hand through the screen. And that's when the Doctor leaves at the end of episode 2. And we know he's going to be gone for 3 and 4. And Altos... No, it's in episode 3. It's when Altos, Tabitha and Susan continue on, and Ian stays behind to find Barbara. And Altos is like, I will be your guardian, Susan. I was like, she doesn't... Yeah, she's 16 years old, but like I think they play her too young in this story.
Yeah. Given some of the stuff that Susan has done, like in previous stories, I would have thought that by this stage now that they could have like maybe allotted like an episode of the story, like a 6-part story that was designed to build characters. They could have allotted at least one episode where she had the standout moment.
Yeah, I mean, her being alone with Sabitha in episode 4, there was great potential there for Susan to sort of to be the one to take care of somebody else.
Given like her experience, her like we'll say universal experience, I won't say worldly experience, but her universal experience and the dangers that she's been in, that would have been a moment for her to shine as opposed to giving the showcase to Sabitha.
Yeah, and even in the previous episode, when they're in the forest, she says that she's heard the shrieking noise before. She recognizes it as something. Now, to me, it kind of sounded a little bit like the TARDIS, which was a bit weird. But I'm like, where did she hear this before? I want to know more about that. You know, maybe Susan and Barbara should have gone through, and then the others jumped onto the ice area. I just think it was, for 6-episode story, she didn't really get a look in, which is unfortunate. And we mentioned Sabitha, so I suppose we could take a quick look at our sort of story companions for this story, which are Sabitha and Altos. So what did you think of our story companions this week?
So Altos, in this regard, I kind of lump him in with Susan a small bit because I think he's just there to really make up the numbers. He doesn't really have a huge lot of contributions that I think, and again, like the only thing that when I think of Altos, I can think of is just the actor that plays him, who seems very kind of upper class English, and that's all the only thing. And not saying anything bad about upper class English, but that's the only thing. That's the only striking thing about the whole story is that Altos comes across as a very upper class English person. I didn't really buy into him as to being an actual character in the story, which again I suppose is a shame for the work of the actor put in. But Sabitha, on the other hand, then maybe it's the fact that she's like Arbitan's daughter, or I've no idea, but she's definitely the stronger and the more engaging of the two. Like she, as we said, she's the one that reassures Susan in the cave. Like so, she's like calm, cool, and collected. Like she's the doctor's witness, or like the doctor's, like fake witness during the trial, and she's up there, not a bother to her at all. And as well, back when Yartek has Altos and Sabitha like held captive, she's more than willing to like sacrifice herself for the greater good that the Voords don't get the keys. Now I know Altos has like big romantic moment of like saying, "No, I'll tell you what you want. Please don't hurt the woman that I love." Again, like I suppose like it's kind of interesting to see that sort of thing flipped.
Yeah, I think for me, Sabitha was definitely the stronger of the two. Even at the end, Altos kind of screwed it up. She had this plan of pretending he wasn't important in the hopes that they'd just leave him alone. But because of the way he was acting, they realized that no, he's really important to her, so we can use him as leverage, which, it was interesting to have the male companion used as leverage rather than the female companion. So yeah, I found her a lot nicer. The way she was portrayed, like some of the acting choices, just in terms of her manner of speech and things, I maybe wouldn't have agreed with, but didn't take me out of the story. It's just, I found it a little bit odd. Altos, though, I mean, my first note about Altos is creepy. Now that made sense. That made sense while they were in Morphoton and while they were being controlled by the brains. When they leave, though, he's still creepy. Like in the first scene where like he's no longer under the brain's control, he still doesn't blink for like the entire duration of the shot being on him, which is a good 30 to 40 seconds. He still doesn't blink, and I'm like, okay, you're creepy. And there's the way, I don't know if it's the fact that it's the sort of like the British upperclassness combined with the fact that he's meant to be a servant, and it's this balance of the two that somehow just came across as creepy. And like I said, I'll be your guardian, Susan. I was just like, ugh, don't do that.
Cool shiver.
Yeah, I do have a question about Altos and Sabita, though, and their
Mm-hmm.
questionable intelligence.
Right.
So we find out in episode 5 that the whole group, so the Doctor and the others, were in that city for a couple of days before we catch up with them. Because they had time to plan the op with Ypres and all that kind of stuff. Why are Sabita and Altos still wearing the rags that they were wearing in Morphoton? Like, his clothing choice is nowhere near appropriate. He's wearing a skirt that barely covers his arse. And her clothes aren't much better. I'm like, you've been in this highly advanced culturally advanced city for days. Change your clothes.
Well, you can't really say too much about that because isn't Ian still wearing the Chinese clothes he had from Marco Polo throughout this entire story?
But he's not from this planet.
Yeah, but like at the same time, I don't think any of them have any form of currency on them.
Yeah, but like, Ypres is Altos's friend. Surely Ypres had a spare pair of pants, for the love of God. At least Ian was wearing suitable clothing that covered all of him. Do you know, Ypres just going around with his arse out. It's like, and apparently he loves Sabita, but he's perfectly happy for her to still be dressed in rags. Like, they go to court. They go to court still wearing rags. And I'm like, it's a small thing. But it's the small things that sort of make you question people's intelligence in shows.
It's the new clothing style on Marinus. Yeah, homeless chic.
Yeah.
So how about we now transition from the light side of things into the dark side of things and go over the villains?
Indeed. So for the villains, so the primary villains of the story, even though we only get them in like episodes 1 and episode 6, are the Vord,
Yeah.
who look like BDSM Teletubbies.
That's because of like the little weird antenna thing that's part of the suit, yeah.
Yeah, they're in these like, they're meant to be, I assume, rubber, but they're these like leather bodysuits with these weird antennae that look a little bit like the Teletubby antennae. To be honest, I just found them funny and not especially threatening.
Well, in the first episode, I disagree because how the whole thing is set up, like, you know, with the trapdoors and with Arbitan making it look like there was more than one of him around the place, and like this weird sort of almost ninja-esque fight between the few Vords and Arbitan. I actually thought their wetsuit apparel kind of lent itself to that mystique, that they looked like assassins fighting with temple guardians and like that kind of thing. I thought was cool. But by the end of it, when you see Yartek, and I'd lump Yartek in with the Vords overall, because for being this huge global villain, the one that kind of brought Marinus' societies nearly to its knees, he just seems like just another guy. He's not overly intimidating. There's nothing really memorable about him. Like, if they had wanted to kind of really build up how evil he was, maybe they should have done like just random clips of him throughout the entire story.
Even have him mentioned throughout the entire story.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't really get mentioned by, like, no one in more, like, the Brains don't mention him, Vassar doesn't mention, like, none of the other villains mention him.
And as well, this is like one of those, this is like, I suppose, unusual for a Doctor Who story in that we get to see the planet as a whole. So like each, like, you know, we move to different continents, we move to different countries where like they all have their own customs and that kind of stuff. So like, you know, for example, the Morphotons, we have no way of knowing that they were very similar to Millennius, and from the style of the clothing and the architecture, they were very different. I think having each society's own views of Yartik and the Vords would have been kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think the one thing where I think my opinion of the Vord sort of differed from yours in terms of their threat level and how much I enjoyed or didn't enjoy them is I felt they acted too slowly. Like, physically, their movements when they were fighting were too slow. You know, if they're going for the ninja-esque movements, had they been faster, I probably would have gotten over the funny look of them a lot quicker. But like when they're going to stab someone, like even like in the final episode when they're creeping up on Ian, one of them creeps up on Ian and the Doctor goes to hit him with his walking stick. he's so slow in his movement. Now maybe it's that he's trying not to be heard, but it just makes them look a bit ridiculous to me. I think had their movements been faster and more accurate and more determined, I probably would have gotten on board with them a lot better.
I usually use, like, how I usually kind of measured those fights is I measured them up against the Gorn fight in Star Trek. If anything can move faster than that fight scene, then look, it's a masterpiece. But that's getting
a pretty low bar.
Well, like oh, we're moving franchises here, but like that's my measuring stick. Is it better than the Gorn fight? Yes. Okay.
Cool. So that was the board. We're not going to go through all of them in every episode, but just to give some highlights. Brains in jars. What were your thoughts on the brains?
So that type of thing I do enjoy. Like, I enjoy like this concept of beings that have surpassed the need for physical bodies and their mental abilities are holding everyone in check. I think it was kind of cool. But the eye stalks with the eyeballs at the end of them, I thought was a bit silly, especially seeing as how like they radiated up as opposed to hanging down. It kind of just reminded me of like malicious slugs.
Yeah, my question was, why did they need eyeballs?
I don't know.
They're meant to be like creepy brain things. Like what they reminded me of the first time, because when we see them first, you see them from the back. Do you know?
Yeah.
Which is a good shot choice, by the way.
Yeah.
Shoot them from the back. So they just look like brains, and it looks like there's something coming out of them, but you don't know what that is. There's like the two stalks, and they reminded me of. Do you remember the brains in jars that were in Sabrina the Teenage Witch?
Vaguely.
They were kind of reminding me of that. There's also another brain Doctor Who story that will come later that they remind me a little bit of that as well. But it's when they pan around and you see the two little stalks with the little eyeballs on it. I was just like, why? Like, just leave them as the brain. Just the brain in the jar was fine. But the minute you add the eye stalks, it kind of ruins it. But like, I loved that episode of this story. I loved that micro adventure or mini adventure. And again, I'm a big fan as well of the sort of superior intellectual being that transcends the need for a physical body and stuff like that. So they were really good in that respect. Just shoot them from the back, guys. Just
one thing as well about those sort of scenarios, especially in like television or in movies, it really, really gives a good opportunity for the actors, because I love the whole trapped in the illusion scenario where one person sees reality and the others don't. So it kind of really changes their acting dynamic with people.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
If I had to pick a favourite out of all 6 episodes, it's that one. Of all the 6 mini adventures, that was my favourite.
That is a very strong contender. I'd probably go with 4, actually moving on to the next villain. But I'd probably... That is my second favourite of the entire 6. But episode 4 with Vassor is probably my favourite.
Okay, so what do you like about Vassor? Or what did you think of Vassor? I think liking him is a strong term.
Yeah, alright. I like the episode because there's an awful lot happening in it. And again, it's a really good showcase for Barbara, because not to, as I mentioned earlier on about the actor, that he always plays a scumbag, and that's because he's got big bushy eyebrows and a very sinister face. It's a really, really good episode because I'm a bit into kind of, you know, the shows about serial killers and movies about serial killers and that kind of stuff. And Vassor is one of those. He is a serial killer by his whole thing of that he leaves people stranded under the pretense of helping them, and he doesn't directly kills them, but he puts them into the scenario which they will more likely end up dead. But also there is I think it's a very brave subject to touch in essentially what was a children's television show, was the implication that he is going to force himself on Barbara.
Yeah, and I might address that in a bit more detail when we're doing our overall look at the story, because I think it feeds into a bigger theme in this story that I wasn't quite aware of going into it. I think Vassor gave me the creeps from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, before you find out anything about how he'd seen Altos already, he gave me the creeps from the beginning. The way he looks down on them at the start is creepy. He is clearly someone who's very comfortable with what he has done. And like you said, he has clearly done it many, many times before. The fact that he doesn't even try to hide his intentions with Barbara. Like, even before Ian leaves, he's kind of being a pervy bastard towards her, like. And yeah, he lulls Ian into a bit of a false sense of security, but, you know, the minute Ian's gone, he's immediately playing house with her.
Yeah.
They're sitting down to dinner. Oh, I'll wash these. You clean that up there. And it's like, oh my god, that's so creepy and disturbing. But for a creepy and disturbing plot point and for a creepy and disturbing character, they did it really well. It gave me the creeps, like.
Oh, they did it fantastically. And again, as I said, that actor, he's really good at playing that role. He's that section of the story, I think, is really good. I also like the secondary section, which is like the ice cave with the frozen guardians, because I love stuff like that when statues come to life after stuff is triggered and it's like a fight to the death. Like I recently rewatched like the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, and like you got that section where like the statues come to life. But that was my favorite episode of this story. And I think Vassor is an interesting villain in the sense of he doesn't directly kill people. He puts themselves into a scenario in which they will be killed, and he probably thinks in his own head that, again, I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and like he'll take anything he can get. So like he has furs, but he doesn't loan them out. And in fairness, objectively speaking, it is his livelihood. He's not going to give away his products free of charge, but he picks up on the little things that are important. Like from Susan and Sabitha, he didn't just take their travel dials. He also took the keys because he realised they were important. He could have just taken the travel dials and left it at that, but he took this other thing as well. Ian didn't carry anything else that was important, so he only took Ian's travel dial.
Yeah.
For the last 2 episodes, to say that they're the villains is probably the wrong way of putting it, but we have the group of people trying to steal the key and framing Ian. To be honest, I think they were the weakest. They were like, you'd expect to see it on like something like Law and Order or something.
Yeah, like I've labelled them the conspiracy, and I think it's a case of they're villains. They are villains by circumstance, in the sense of they had been planning to probably steal the key and then return it again for a big reward. And Ian just came along and they were like, aha, perfect, now we have our actual scapegoat here. One thing that I did notice about them, and I thought it was an interesting kind of dynamic, is that like Aiden, the guard, like he's clearly a non-entity as such. Like he's just he's a patsy for them, that if the investigators ever got close, he would take the fall. But I think it's interesting that like Ison, the chief prosecutor, and Aiden's wife Carla, I get this impression that they were like having an affair.
Oh, totally.
And I also get the impression like that they're both alphas, and if like the situation, I would love to see what would happen if there ever came down a scenario where they realised that it had to be one or the other, and see which one would betray the other one fast enough.
Yeah, I think they're the 3 of them together. So Aiden, Carla, and I've forgotten his name. You just said it. Ison.
Yeah.
Like I said, they're characters you'd expect to see on Law and Order or CSI or any sort of police procedural program. They're, an archetype of... They fit the archetype for that. But they do fit it quite well. It's portrayed very well. I just didn't find them particularly interesting because we've seen those types of characters a million times over. I do agree with you, though, that Aiden was the fall guy. He was always meant to be the fall guy. Carla and Ison are definitely having an affair, and they have done for years, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They're very familiar with each other, is the sense that I got, and they know each other quite well. And I think had Ian not turned up, they probably would have run the same plan, but it would have been Carla and Ison, without telling Aiden, would have had Aiden take the fall for the death of Ypres. And it would have been the exact same episode, but with Aiden instead of Ian.
Yeah. You get this impression like Aiden was like, hey guys, look, we have another fall guy. And they're like, shite.
So the Keys of Marinus has been an interesting story. Many mini adventures, lots of characters, both good and bad. Paddy, what was your opinion of the story as a whole?
I really, really enjoyed this story because the way that Doctor Who has been kind of done up until now, that we've seen it is that it seems like imagine like a huge RPG that they're moving on for the next quest, and like they have their end goal of trying to get Ian and Barbara back to 1963, and every episode has essentially been an occurrence and an adventure. But to get to this one now, where it's lots of different mini adventures, it feels like almost like when you're playing a video game and you do the optional side quests, and like that's what this kind of feels like, is that it's the side questy part of their adventure. I loved it because we got to see some really, really good character development from the Doctor, Ian, and Barbara. You got to see them, as you've kind of said that before. You used to lump kind of Ian and Barbara in together, whereas on the rewatch, they're two completely separate entities. Like they both have their strengths, their weaknesses. They work well together, but they work just as well apart.
Yeah.
Again, some great stuff with the Doctor. Like, you know, he's come on. Like Hartnell is perfectly hit his stride, and now he is like Usain Bolt marathoning his way or sprinting his way into the role. He's just gotten so comfortable with it, and you can see why he became the beloved person that he actually was, or the beloved character that he was back then. As I said earlier on, I do like the fact that we've arrived on an alien planet and we get to explore it. We get to see that not every person on it is the same, not every culture is the same, the different viewpoint. Like, I would love to have known like what a justice system was like other than Millennius, because the Millennius, as we said, it's like, you know, guilty until proven innocent. The things that I would not really, things I don't really like about this particular episode are, as we mentioned, Susan. Like, if you're going to take time to develop the characters, or the main characters, do all of them, not just a handful of them, or in this case, like 3/4. Like, if it had been only 2 of them, you'd be kind of going, right, fair enough. But like, if it's the fact that it's 3 of them are really developed and 1 isn't, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. And as we mentioned earlier on, like the fact that Yartek, who is initially made up by Arbitent to be like this all-conquering monster, he's just a bit of like, you know, it almost feels like a red herring. It's just like, really, was the guy that you were all so terrified of? So yeah, like I think that's the one thing that kind of hurt it a small bit, was the fact that there was no really overarching big bad.
So what was your score out of 5?
So my score out of 5, with everything taken into account, was I've actually given it 4 out of 5.
Very good. So my take on it, and this is where our listeners are going to realise that you remember more about my life than I do.
Yeah.
This was the first William Hartnell story I saw. I think we established that a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I actually bought it for you for your birthday, I think.
Yeah, see, this is what I was trying to remember. I was trying to remember if you bought me this for Christmas or my birthday. They're quite close together. Because you wanted me to watch the first Doctor.
Yeah.
Am I remembering my own history correctly?
That is true. Like, because, yeah, like we had both watched New Who. I had watched a bit more classic than you. You had watched the majority of Tom's run with Sarah. And I had recently just said, I'm going to start from the very start and work my way forward. So I got you, and I knew that you had been interested in classic as well. So I got you the only first Doctor story I could find.
Yeah, thank you, HMV, for the Keys of Marinus. I can't remember what my reaction was to the story when I first saw it, because this was for probably my 21st or my 22nd birthday, so it was like 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that I kept watching William Hartnell after you got me the Keys of Marinus. So clearly I liked it at the time. Watching it now, I do really like it. I think it is a great science fiction story. It brings together a lot of the traditional science fiction elements. You know, it has mind control, it has, you know, going to freezing cold places and nearly freezing, it has creepy forests, it has, you know, people, you know, being accused of a crime they didn't commit, all the things that we've seen in Star Trek and Stargate and, like, you know, all the other science fiction programs. It has all of it in one story.
It does. It really does.
Which is great. Overall, I gave it a 4 out of 5 as well. So we match on this one. The reason why I docked it a point, one, there was, like we said, the development of Susan. I completely agree with you. I think when you have 6 stories that were each a mini adventure, one of them could have been focused around Susan and her abilities. I think that was an oversight that wasn't necessary. The other thing was, like I said, I would have liked to have seen more emotion from Ian around potentially killing Barbara and being accused of murder and going to be killed. Though I do accept what you were saying, though, that I would have slowed it down. The other thing, though, where it lost a point because it made me feel uncomfortable is, and I don't think you and I have discussed this before because I would remember this conversation if we had.
Yeah.
The violence towards women in this story. So we have Ian attempting to strangle Barbara.
Yeah.
We have the implied intent to rape Barbara. And then I never really understood. I think at the end of the episode, I kind of got the sense that she staged it. But if you're watching these week on week, there is a suggestion that Aidan hit his wife.
Yeah.
And that there's a domestic violence element there. Now, it may be that Carla hit Aidan and screamed because she knew that the people were listening at the door. But there is an implied domestic violence situation there.
And like, I suppose, yeah, given, as we said, that Carla seems to be the alpha in that scenario, that it probably wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination that she would either beat him and then stage it to look like she was the one being beaten. And yeah, again, I suppose back when I first watched it, I never really picked up on that.
Yeah, and I think had it been one of those things, I probably wouldn't mind, but you know, it just seemed that there are a lot of violence towards women, and I'm not usually one of those people to get on a feminist soapbox. You know me, I'm not really that type of person anyway. But I couldn't not see it in this, and I can only imagine being a kid in the 60s and watching this. What would the family conversation be like afterwards for any of this? We also, on the flip side, so there's the violence towards women component, which, I mean, the whole thing with Vassar just sort of makes me a bit sick, to be honest.
Yeah.
The other side, though, is there's a lot of death in this story.
Yeah, more so than, I suppose, the previous ones. Or like there's... like, it's not even that there's more death, but the circumstances surrounding the deaths of the people are... They're a lot more varied. Like, because in Daleks we saw, some of the Thals dying, but that was due to a fight for their life, essentially, a fight for their existence. In Marco Polo, we see them trying to defend themselves again from Tagana's machinations. Whereas here, yeah, like you've got the struggle between Arbitan and the Vord, but then you've got the thing with Vassar leaving people to die in these horrible circumstances, and then you've got like I suppose the criminal conspiracy in episodes 4 and 5 that result in Ypres and Aidan's death and could very well have ended in Ian's execution as well. So yeah, actually looking back on it, it is fairly much of a dark episode.
Yeah, it's a lot darker than I seem to remember. And maybe it's because I watched it twice. I watched it once through, and then I watched it on a slightly stoppy-starty motion to take my notes and stuff. But the other thing as well is that with Vassar, as much as I hate him and he gives me the creeps, he just makes my skin crawl, his death was completely unnecessary. So it's implied that he dies, that the ice guards kill him when everyone else jumps away. But it's also implied that when they're going to the cave to find Sabitha and Susan, that Vassar is at Ian's mercy. And that's why he's guiding them up there. They're like Vassar, or Ian and Altos are controlling him. They're keeping him as a prisoner, essentially. Why didn't they bring all of their stuff with them? They left the travel dials and the keys in Vassar's lodge. I can't figure out why, other than the writer wanted to kill Vassar off in a way that doesn't require Ian or any of our heroes to be the one to kill him. And while, there is some sick pleasure to be found in knowing that a creepy, perverted, attempted rapist is going to be killed, his death wasn't necessary. The story could have continued on exactly as it was without that part to it. Do you know, like if they wanted to do the whole thing with the Ice Warriors going after them and the bridge collapsing, have them put the keys down somewhere and then realize, oh crap, the keys are on the other side of the gorge. Like, there was other ways around it other than they were stupid enough to leave all of their stuff in Vassor's house.
Yeah.
And so the ice guards are going to follow them back to Vassor's house, and they're going to jump away after Vassor was stabbed through the stomach.
So there's two things that come into my mind when I think about that, and one is that Vassor has been the king of his own little mountain kingdom for so long, and he's held people at his mercy. And now for the tables to be turned and him pleading on the mercy of others, I suppose maybe that was what he was going for, was maybe, it's a bit of poetic justice. The other thing that kind of comes to mind is that, I was thinking back there as you were speaking, is that all the main villains that we've come across so far, so we had Cal in the Unearthly Child, we had the Daleks, then we had Tagana. All the main antagonists have all died in some way. So, like, but whether it was usually by the hands of someone else, or by the incidental, or by the story-based companions. And in this story, you have the Vord being taken care of, you have the Brains of Morphoton being taken care of, and you also have the conspiracy meeting its fate in one way or the other. I think maybe it would have been a bit jarring if Vassor, the one villain of this group, had been left alive to do his thing.
Yeah, but like, there's another way. If you wanted to kill him off, there's another way you could have done it. So Vassor drops the rope.
Mm-hmm.
He left something, they left something on the other side, so we still have that whole they have to get across the gorge problem. That remains a thing. Although it didn't really need to be. I think the ice guards themselves were an end enough. But you could always have a cutscene to Vassor returning to, going back to his house, and a pack of wolves setting upon him.
Yeah.
Do you know? Him being taken out the same way he took out so many others. I think there's other ways they could have done it without it making our heroes seem stupid, and without it seeming that they were a party to his death. Overall, though, like I said, I think it's a great sci-fi story. I made that sound like I really don't like the episode. I do. I think the episode's great. It's a great sci-fi story. It's a 4 out of 5. I maybe just wouldn't watch it with younger children. I don't think it's age appropriate, to be honest.
And but that's the reason, as you said, we have these discussions, is that it kind of brings up these little concepts as well, that further down the line we're going to see companions and the doctor himself act in ways that we wouldn't think would be befitting of the hero of the story. And I suppose that's what we're here for, is to kind of discuss these points and to invite discussion. So for anyone listening that wants to discuss this point as well, you can come onto the fan page and have a chat with us.
Yep, definitely. So that wraps us up for the Keys of Marinus. Next week, we're going to be taking a trip to the past to visit the Aztecs, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yes.
Paddy, you mentioned that people can get in contact with us if they want to join the discussion. Do you want to share our socials there?
Yes, absolutely. And as well, guys, any comments are always welcome. So if you want to get involved with the conversations with us about episodes that have just gone on, or upcoming episodes, you can check us out at Time Teamp, that's TIMETEAMP, on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or you can email us at timetravelingteamp@teamproductions.com. Until next time, guys. Bye.
Bye.